What's up, guys? Welcome to the Entrepreneur Cast, your source for tactical lessons in entrepreneurship from a cast of entrepreneurs. I'm Jayson Demers.
And I'm Sam McRoberts.
And today we're going to talk about 13 predictions on how the coronavirus crisis will permanently change the world.
This is going to be a fun one, actually. I mean, not fun how it's changing the world. It's actually kind of shitty. But a fun one to discuss because, I mean, who doesn't like predictions?
Well, absolutely. And actually, before this show, Sam, you and I probably spent 20 minutes just talking about all this stuff before we were actually hit record because we were so excited.
Right? So here's the real. Like, we had a completely different episode planned, and we were briefly flipping through our future episode ideas and started talking about this one. And yeah, this one's more fun. Yeah. So we're going to do this one.
We're excited to talk about this one. So we had a little switcheroo.
Cool. So prediction number one, right? And I think this may or may not be obvious, but I think large group gatherings are going to go the way of the dodo. Like, they may not disappear entirely, but I think there's actually a very real risk that large group gatherings may end up being banned. This, it seems like with the coronavirus, there's multiple strains. It spreads so virulently. There's other things. I mean, and then of course there's always the future risk of man-made pathogens, terrorism. I think there's a chance, now that people have a taste of what it's like to not have group gatherings for an extended period of time, there's always a chance that they may just disappear.
So I've got some thoughts on this. I myself have, after having been cooped up for, a month and a half, 2 months, whatever it's been, I'm itching to get out and just do anything. Like, go to a restaurant, go to a bar, sure, have a drink, go see a movie. I want to get out of my house. And as soon as I can, legally, I am going to do that. And so we have to talk about large group gatherings, small group gatherings. If you're in a restaurant, I don't know if that's a large group.
Small group.
Okay.
I think generally a restaurant would be small group. It depends on the restaurant, right? Like Cheesecake Factory is probably more like large group gatherings. Most typical small restaurants in a city are smaller. It really has to do with the number of people and how closely packed they are and like how many. And the how many has to do with just the exponential risks. Like a sporting event, people come in from all over. And so because there's that travel component, there's a much higher degree of risk. People who eat at a local restaurant, unless your city is like a huge tourist destination, it's probably a much smaller pool of people and therefore lower risk.
So let's talk about, you mentioned sporting event. Like, you talk about a large gathering, that probably takes the cake, right? An NFL stadium sits 60, 70,
60,000
up to 100,000 people, depending on the stadium. Are you saying that you think that sporting events are going to go the way of the dodo? Are they going to die off?
I think it's a possibility, or I think it's more likely that they will change, right? So maybe instead of a stadium filled with people, there's a field filled with players and a whole bunch of cameras, and people are watching that event from home. This is a maybe. It's not that there's still a large group of people who would like those things to continue exactly as they've always been. But I think, you look at this, like this is one virus. It's not a particularly lethal one compared to some of the other viruses we've seen, but it has a pretty heavy effect on hospitals and the healthcare system. I mean, it's costing the world trillions and trillions of dollars. And this is just one virus. I think now that, the current living generations are exposed to this sort of risk, that risk profiles are going to change, and some things that were nice to have but not absolutely necessary are going to be reconsidered. And I think sporting events may fit in that bucket.
I think that if they were to be banned, it would have to come from the government because there's too much profit to be made.
Oh, for sure.
Going to the stadium.
There's tons of money. Yeah, and I don't know if it'll end up being a ban. I don't know if it'll be a shift. I mean, I think this is coming anyway. We can get out of order. I think we can just riff on this, but like VR, right? Like, I think VR is going to become a bigger and bigger thing. And now it's, also appealing in that it mitigates risk. You can have some really cool group experiences without having to be physically present with virtual reality. Like the NASCAR shutting down their season, but having people race on their virtual training machines and stuff like that. I think there's some interesting places that could go. And it may, for a lot of reasons, right? Like so for example, all right, let's stick with sports. The cost of running the NFL, like the real estate, maintaining the stadiums, the people to run it, all of the food, like everything, like the cost is enormous. And yes, there's pretty solid profit margins, but what if you could have most of that profit or more profit and less costs? Not having to have the physical locations completely changes the cost structure of your business, and it probably won't dramatically change the revenue that you can make from it. So it could be an interesting trade-off. There may actually be some business incentives to do it a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really going to come down to what what the NFL owners, and you talk about any sport really. How are we going to make the most money?
Sure.
Can we make more money if we're streaming this out to people in their home and charging maybe a fee to have, let's say, a VR front row seat access? Maybe that's something that they consider doing.
And there's sports where there are limitations on playing them because of seasons and weather and locations. So maybe now it could become a year-round thing. Maybe there doesn't have to be an off season because you could do it all at an indoor, a field inside of a warehouse instead of a stadium you need to pack with people. Like it, there's a lot of things that can change, and that it can be very difficult for people to see an alternative way to do things until they're forced to consider alternatives.
Sure. I think there's a lot of nuance here. Like I know that, for instance, NFL players would not be able to play year round because of the physical toll it takes on their bodies. They need the
That's
off
probably
season.
true.
Same with NBA players and same with a lot of physical sports. There are probably some sports and events that, where it would be fine. Like looking outside of sports, other big venues that I can think of, an example would be concerts. Um,
Sure.
and this is really interesting because so I'm really into a band called Smash Into Pieces, which is they're from there's either Norway or Sweden or somewhere I should know. But anyway, one of my favorite bands. And because of this crisis, they've canceled their tour. And what they've done instead is they're now selling tickets to a digital event. They've planned their first ever digital concert, which is going to be streamable, and they're charging I think $10 for attendance to this digital event. It's happening on April 25th. I went ahead and bought a ticket because I'm like, cool. I want to see this. I'll put this up on my TV and turn the speakers way up, and rock out in my own home to a concert. That
No,
sounds
totally.
that sounds cool. And there are
So
this could just
I'm
be
I'm
the
a
tip of the
I'm a
iceberg.
hard yeah, like I'm a hard introvert. I like going out and doing some things, but I do not like being packed in, huge crowd, lots of people together, high levels of CO2 that makes you brain foggy. Like I really don't enjoy stuff like that. But I love music. I love watching a lot of different types of events, and if I have the option to do that virtually, like I'm way more likely to spend money. I will not spend money to go to a concert physically, but I would happily spend money to attend a concert digitally. So it opens up an entire potential new audience.
Absolutely. So I don't know if I'm willing to say that large gatherings will go the way of the dodo. I think what I would say is I think it's going to change a lot and new options are going to become available to attend those events. I think
That's fair.
as long as the profit margins remain in favor of having physical events and letting people risk, getting sick or risking themselves getting sick, but that's their choice, that these things will continue to exist until governments say enough is enough. Maybe it'll take another pandemic for governments to say we're banning it or we're limiting these things. But I think really it's going to come down to capitalism in the end. How can we make the most money?
Yeah, I mean, that coupled with risk, right? Like,
Agreed.
because a pandemic really messes with your ability to make money, as a lot of businesses are discovering.
Absolutely. Well, I'll start with number two, and that would be it's going to become way more acceptable to stay home when you're sick
God, I hope
because
so.
nobody wants to, especially now that we've all lived through and are living through this crisis. We know just how much it can screw with everybody. Not just me getting sick, but my company uh, getting financially sick and then laying off people, my friends, my colleagues, my coworkers. Nobody wants that, and so right now I feel like not right now, but I feel like prior to this crisis there was sort of a shame of,
Yeah,
if you're sick, you shouldn't stay home. Tough it out. Get your ass in
you took a
here.
s- you
Work.
took you took a sick day, you weakling. How dare you?
Right,
Like,
right.
yeah,
And I think that mentality is out. It's going to be out the window now. I think if someone's sick, everyone's going to say, "Please stay home. Don't even think about coming in." And you know what? Go ahead and stay home for a week after your symptoms are gone too, just to be sure that you're not going
right.
to bring it
I
in.
hope so.
Yeah,
Yes, like that's always been a pet peeve for me. It's like you realize that when you're sick, if you bring it into work, you're powering through it, but you're spreading it to everybody else. And so you're essentially causing a ripple effect of decreased productivity and suffering and possibly even financial strain to a lot of people. Like, how dare you? How dare you be somebody who spreads that to other people? It always pissed me off. Like, I've sent people home who've come into work sick. I've complained about it. Like, I think if you're ill, you should absolutely stay home, period. And I get that not everybody can do that financially, right? If you have a job you have to be physically present for, any day you're not there is a day you're not getting paid. Like, I get that that's a strain, but it's still, I don't know, it feels a combination of cruel and apathetic to, make other people sick just because, it
Yeah.
pisses me off.
No, I hear you. Well, I think those days are over now as a result of this crisis. I think that we've all seen firsthand what happens when too many people get sick, and it is not good for anybody. Anybody,
Agreed.
I mean, everybody around the world is affected by this. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that.
So three, speaking of staying home when sick, right? I think remote work is going to become much more common. I've heard varying stats, somewhere between 30 to maybe even 50% of all jobs like could actually be done remotely. And that's pretty significant. And it has huge impacts to a business. Typical businesses, I mean, they may be spending anywhere from 10 to 20, 25% of their revenue on physical locations, real estate, offices, all of the stuff that goes into supporting it. Like, it can be a very large chunk of a company's revenue. And if you can cut all that out and all you have to pay for is like a desk and a good internet connection for somebody at home, if that, that's huge. And there's also all the data on productivity, right? Like, the average person in an office is maybe working for 3 to 4 hours out of their 8-hour workday, if you're lucky, and the rest is wasted. And so by leaving people at home, they get to be happier, they get to be more productive, they get to save time on their commute, they get to not spread illness at the office. It costs you less money, you save money on rent. Like, there's all of these reasons to do it. And I think this is forcing people to discover that it can be done efficiently, saves you money. Like, why don't we just keep it this way afterwards?
Yes, exactly. That's my thought exactly. And you're right. And I just put up a post on email analytics called 77 remote work statistics to know. One of those statistics is that productivity was found to increase by 13% in remote workers. Another interesting stat is that 20 people are on average 25% of people are more happy. No, I'm still not right. I'll look up this stat, but it has to do with
Okay.
happiness. Essentially, 25% more people are happy when working from home. I'll find the exact wording on that one.
Cool.
There are some other stats. Go check them out because it really shows just how beneficial working from home is. And you nailed it, Sam, because we're all already working from home now anyway. Not granted, let me retract that. Not all of us are. I understand that. But many people are working from home that previously did not. And I think this is forcing bosses, managers
Yeah.
to say, A, what do we need to do to make this work? And B, holy shit, this is working. We can do this. Why go back? We've already got all the
I mean,
systems and processes set up to make this work now.
right? Like, it's a whole can of worms. I mean, this workday, the 8-hour in an office workday thing is a holdover. It's ancient, and it doesn't fit at all with what we actually know about human performance, psychology, neuroscience. People are good for 60 to 120-minute stretches of focused work, and then they need a break. 30 minutes, an hour, a complete change of pace, switch gears, do something else, go for a walk. We know that sitting all day or even standing all day isn't healthy for you, that it's better that you move every 30 minutes or so, that your brain is not just much happier, but much more focused when you're doing some sort of movement. So, like, taking your Zoom calls and doing your meetings as you walk around the park. Like, there's so many ways that you could optimize the work environment. Break it out. You don't have to magically be productive for an 8-hour stretch in an office. Like, that's stupid and it needs to go away.
Agreed. And while you were talking, by the way, I had to go find that stat so that I could correct
All right, let's
myself.
hear it.
All right. It's remote workers are 24% more likely to be happy than non-remote workers. Okay. So people are more happy. And here's another one for you. Companies with remote work have 25% lower turnover. That can add up to enormous savings. I mean, hiring
Huge.
hiring is expensive, training is expensive. So there are major financial benefits to allowing work from home. And I think that now that companies are being forced to make it work, they're going to see that it's really not as scary as they thought it was. They'll just stick with it.
Agreed.
That's my hope, but also my prediction. So we'll see how it goes. So for number 4, I think we're going to see the acceleration of the death of physical retail. already we've seen malls looking like ghost towns, right? Because
Totally.
Amazon is well, because Amazon, period.
Amazon, Walmart, Costco,
hmm Yeah.
maybe a couple other big box retailers, but yeah.
No, you're right. You can get everything you need from those places, and we're seeing a lot of physical retail dry up and just get pushed out by these big players that we mentioned. I think that's going to accelerate. We're already seeing companies that are getting into danger of folding because of this crisis. And as people learn that they can get what they need online or from these other big box retailers that you mentioned, they're going to they're going to cut the habit. If that was all that was if that was all that was left that was keeping them going to these places, that they're going to break that habit as a result of this. And so we're going to see the acceleration of the death of physical retail.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of other pieces to that, but like technology is making it easier to do that. More and more people are getting comfortable with digital transactions, shipping speeds and tracking and returns are getting faster and easier. Being able to use your phone, like augmented reality now is becoming more common. So it allows you to try things on, see if they fit in your room, if it fits the decor. Like there's so many things that you can now do that reduce not just the friction, but the risk associated with online transactions. I see no reason why it doesn't go purely virtual for almost everything at some point, and I think this is going to accelerate that process.
Agreed. I think Amazon is due for we're going to see Amazon explode even
For
more, I think.
Oh yeah, they'll for sure they'll be the world's first $2 trillion company,
I
no
think
sweat.
so.
So number five, I would say thank you, please. Handshakes are gone for good.
I think you're right.
I've never liked handshakes. They're kind of a dual holdover. So one, were you armed? Like back in the day, the dark ages, you'd shake somebody's hand to make sure they didn't have a sword or a knife or something in their dominant hand. And two, there's the religious connotation, like you're making sure the person you're talking to is real. They're not a ghost. They're not some mythical being. Like I can touch them. They're real.
I hadn't heard
And it
about
just
that
kind
one.
of
That's interesting.
yeah, I forget where I read that, but that was one of the two. A handshake was a way to know that the person you were meeting was real and unarmed.
I knew about the
And
unarmed
so,
one. I knew that origin, but I let me make sure you're not a ghost. let's just
right? Like
let's shake hands.
I, I used to read a lot of mythology stuff as a kid, and I'd swear I read that in there somewhere. But yeah, like, but they're filthy. Like you look at hand washing statistics. I mean, last I heard in the U.S., it's something like 74% of men don't wash their hands after taking a leak. I'm sorry, I hate shaking hands.
Ugh.
I also hate like touching surfaces that people have touched right after. I did this biology experiment as a kid in school. They sent us around with a bunch of petri dishes and swabs and had us swab stuff to see which surfaces were the dirtiest. The bathroom door handle leaving the bathroom was filthy. Filthy.
Oh,
So
gross.
anyway, I hate shaking hands. And now that we realize how much risk there is in handshakes for spreading, potentially very serious illnesses, I think that one's going to die, and I really hope it does.
Well, this is really interesting because having a strong, firm handshake has been a staple of I think Western culture for probably is I don't even know how many years. But you look at any just go Google proper etiquette for meeting somebody, and one of the top tips you're always going to see people
Sure.
say is how work on your handshake. Don't have a limp handshake. Have a strong, firm grip. Well, I think that the new revised thing is going to be something about I don't know what the new thing is going to be. Maybe it's a fist bump, maybe it's a shoulder bump, or I mean an
Bowing.
elbow bump. It could be bowing. Like that's
I
Japanese
mean,
culture, right?
right? Chinese, do they bow in China? Like, I know bowing is a big thing in the East. I don't know if it's solely Japanese.
Yeah, I actually
But
don't know either. I know it's Japanese for sure. I don't know what other cultures use it, but
but it makes sense,
it
right? No
does.
physical contact, no risk of transferring the virus. Like, yeah, that makes
It
sense.
makes a lot of sense. For me, I had an eye-opening moment. I went to PAX East with my wife, which is like a video game convention in Boston because she's in the video game industry. So I accompanied her, and I was meeting a developer who we've worked with in the past. We're big fans of them. They're big fans of Brit. Brit's my wife, and I went to shake his hand. And this is at the beginning of, sorry, this is at the end of February. Okay, so this is right when the news headlines were starting to kind of say, there's a problem here. But this is before everything was shut down. So the PAX East convention in Boston was something like I think 90,000 attendees, all in
Wow.
conference room. And this is at the very start of the crisis. So I went to shake his hand, as we had done many times before. This is a guy who I'd met on many other occasions, and he put out his elbow and said, sorry man, let's elbow bump, coronavirus. And I was like, oh, of course, of course. And we did the elbow bump. And I thought to myself, wow, this is the first time that I have sort of encountered this. And since then I've been very mindful of not extending my hand for a handshake, because I don't think anybody wants to be put in that awkward situation right now amidst the crisis. But I don't see myself going back to doing that, because I don't know if somebody's going to be uncomfortable with that, and B, after going through and living through this crisis, do I want that on my hand? Like, I mean,
Mm-mm.
I want to be professional and I want to be courteous, but how can I do that in a way that isn't awkward? I think as a culture, as a society, we're going to have to decide what we're going to do from now on. And maybe it's bowing, maybe it's an elbow bump, maybe it's a fist bump. I don't know
Could
yet.
be a smile and a nod with like
A slight,
clear eye, looking him in the eyes. But
yeah.
yeah, I mean, I personally switched to fist bumps years ago because I just freaking hate handshakes.
Well, it's smart. I'm going to be really interested to see where this goes, because handshakes are so common and they're such a staple of, of meeting someone, making a first impression. But uh, I don't think they're going to make a comeback. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say.
Farewell.
Farewell. So number six would be, I think that let's talk about movies first. I think movies are going to start releasing direct to streaming, probably simultaneously with theater release. And over time, I think we're going to see the decline of physical theaters. I don't think we're going to see them die off entirely, because I think that there is something special about going to a movie. I get the feels when I go to a movie theater, and I like it. But what I don't want to do is sit in a crowded theater with a ton of other people and have to look over someone's head. That sucks, and I won't do that. But if I can go to a theater and have a small group of people, and I can have a clear view of the screen, and I can have a few drinks beforehand at the bar, and just kind of have a feel good, maybe a date night with my wife, to me that sounds good. And so that's why I don't think they'll die, but I think we're going to see movies released to streaming simultaneously. What do you think?
So, flip side of that. So, I used to be an obsessive movies in the theater goer, right? I would see generally one, sometimes two movies per week in the theater. Loved it. I'm a huge movie buff. However, I spent the last almost 2.5 years traveling around the world, and it can be really difficult to find movies in English or, that don't have subtitles. And then there's just the whole theater thing, right? Like I'm in a theater and I hear somebody coughing and it's like, ah, shit. And especially now, right? I think going forward, that's going to be a bigger thing. So I don't know. I don't know if the theaters will die. I don't know if masks will be required. I don't know exactly how that'll change. But I'll tell you this: as I've been going to less and less movie theaters over time, I'm finding that I don't actually miss it as much. I actually kind of really like just laying in bed and watching a movie on my iPad. And then the flip side, and I'll talk about this in just a second, but like VR, right? So I don't know if you've ever watched a movie on a VR headset. It's getting better. It's getting better and better. And at some point, you're going to be able to throw on a VR headset and some good headphones and watch a movie, and it's going to feel like you're in a theater with an enormous screen and really good sound, but without all the people. No coughing, no germs, no expensive ticket and concession prices, like no waiting in line. I think there's some real value in that. And then to the movie production companies, there's a lot of
Still there,
costs
Sam?
that go into showing things in theaters. There's more profit to be made by sending it directly to people. I think that may end up being what happens. So I don't know if theaters will die or if they'll just require that anybody watching a movie wears a mask. Maybe they'll start doing temperature checks. I don't know how that's going to end up being.
No, I
Pretty low
agree.
margin.
I agree. And we might as well just segue into number seven, because that's VR anyway. Because I've got some thoughts on VR. I've tried the whole
Yeah,
watch a movie with friends thing in VR, and it's we're not there yet
not
in
there
terms
yet.
of technology. The what am I trying to say? The resolution isn't good enough, and if you look sort of peripherally, it blurs. You have to look straight ahead, which is annoying. Um, we need
There's a
VR tech to advance before that becomes a plausible alternative, I would say.
my, my gut tells me we're about maybe 1.5 to 2 years. We're another one full product iteration cycle, I think, on the VR front before the remaining issues are solved. So I think by the time that Apple releases their Play in 2022, 2023, I think it'll be solid. But it's getting closer. I'm hearing that the Oculus Quest is actually quite good, and it solved a lot of the key problems. But once we have something, where you can handle the wider field of view, foveated rendering to make sure that things are always sharp wherever you're looking, just better quality screens, less screen door effect, I think it'll get there though. And I do think VR is going to become enormous because once it's good enough, it enables you to do a tremendous number of experiences without having to physically travel. And so, if you want to tour the tombs of a pharaoh or the Colosseum in Rome, and there's no way you can afford to go there, you can do it in extreme high fidelity. I think that's going to be an option for a lot of people.
I would totally do it once the tech got there. So because my wife is in the video game space, we have an HTC Vive, we have a Gen 1 Oculus,
Which
and
was terrible.
yes, and we have a PlayStation VR. So I've tried all three, and they're novel and they're interesting, but I haven't used them since the first time I put it on,
Yep.
and then that was it. I was like, well, that was an interesting experience, but I have no desire to go back and use these again.
Needs
And
more time.
it needs more time. And then I don't know how many people are prone to motion sickness, but I am. And so if I'm moving in VR but I'm not moving in real life, that disconnect actually causes me to get dizzy, and it's really bad. Like I can get nauseous from it after just 10 seconds of being exposed to that
Yeah.
sensation, and it lasts for
And
like an hour.
yeah, I mean, for stuff like movies, right, you're physically stationary, so that's not an issue. For games where you have to move around, that's something different. I think we'll probably still end up solving that too. Maybe you could use, ultrasounds to affect the inner ear and mimic movement. I don't know. I don't know exactly what'll happen, but I do think that along the lines of large group gatherings either dying off or decreasing, VR may become a viable alternative.
I think so. Well, number 8, I'm going to say that more people are going to make money as streamers and entertainers from home. We're already seeing the rise of this trend with services like Twitch, right? Where you can go watch people play video games, and they make money by becoming Twitch affiliates or Twitch partners, and then people can donate or send tips and things like of that nature. That's already growing and becoming huge, but I think that the coronavirus is actually going to accelerate that trend. People are going to realize I can make money doing stuff from home. I can create content that people like to consume. I can cultivate an audience with people who watch my streams, and I can essentially build a business off of creating content for people, doing something I like to do, and making money. And that can be how I support myself. That can be my livelihood.
So, an example of this, I just heard that at the request of their providers, Airbnb Experiences is spun up the ability to do Airbnb virtual experiences. So, some of the hot experiences were like taking a cooking class with somebody or, watching a professional as they gave a tour of something. And so, Airbnb is now letting them do some of these things virtually. You can pay to attend a virtual experience. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And I think stuff like this again, why would you spend the money to cook a meal for everybody or take the time to walk them through a city if you could do it once virtually and spin it out? Like, this is the whole digital product thing over again. And I think it's going to appeal to a lot of people and open up a whole new way of providing a livelihood for yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Number 9, I think we're seeing this already, and this is sad because I'm a huge restaurant buff, but I think many restaurants, unfortunately, are going to end up closing because of this and staying closed. The ones that manage to survive, I don't know if they're going to be able to continue to afford a physical location. I think while I don't think eating at restaurants is going to go away, it may be a while before they're back at full capacity, whether because people are uncomfortable or because of restrictions that are in place. So I think some of them may spin into cloud kitchens. They no longer have a physical location for you to eat at, but they still make all your same favorite things from a kitchen and deliver it to your house via food delivery. Like, I'd be okay with that. And I think food delivery is very much on the rise.
Yeah.
One of the things that still seems to be ticking along nicely with the whole coronavirus
Yeah,
thing.
it does.
So I think that maybe the primary way of eating out going forward.
You might be right. I think that I don't think all restaurants are going to die off. I think that the traditional date night of going to a restaurant, that has to stay around. But I think that there will be a lot of restaurants that could not survive the crisis. But my question to you, Sam, you're much more of a restaurant buff and sort of a foodie than I am, but I have to think that after the crisis, we're going to see, new restaurants pop up that take the places of the old ones. Do you
Probably.
do you see that being suppressed for some reason?
I think with this, there's just so many unknowns, right? There's some people who think, hey, you know what, the economy, just another few weeks or a month, like things are going to bounce back and it's going to turn around. And then there's the other set who's saying, it could be 18 months, it could be 2 years, it could be a very long time before things get to go back to normal because of the way that we're handling this, right? And I don't know the answer, but I think it's worth considering that if social distancing and having to do rolling lockdowns becomes a new norm, businesses that require people getting together physically, like they're going to be screwed whether they want to be or not. So I think it's a very real possibility that that could happen. And so if it does, remote food delivery stuff may become much more common.
Yeah, I agree.
But so I know a fair bit about the restaurant industry. It's a notoriously low margin business, but a huge part of that margin is the physical real estate. Having to have a restaurant and a large kitchen and a front and people to manage the front of the house. Like, if you get rid of the front of the house and if you get rid of the physical location and your cost is only the kitchen and the food and the labor to cook it, that changes the dynamics and the financials of a restaurant very much. And I think there may be a lot of restaurants because a lot of people who run restaurants, maybe they don't want to deal with all that hassle. Like, they love cooking food. They want to have a restaurant because they love to cook, not because they want to deal with all of those expenses and margin issues. So it may be appealing for more people to become cloud restaurateurs and run a much more profitable business without having a physical storefront.
Cloud restaurateurs. I like it. That's an interesting concept. Well,
Right? I mean, so like famously, just recently, the founder of Uber left Uber, left the board, sold off. I think he sold off most of his shares, and is starting a cloud kitchen company. So good timing.
interesting. Good timing indeed. Well, for number 10, I'm going to say that telemedicine will become normal. So already we have apps, where you can talk to your doctor through the app. I think it's going to become much more commonplace. We're seeing a big need for expanding the capacity of healthcare, and one of the big one of the big things that bogs the whole system down is when you have to go and do into the office. You got to drive there, you got to sit in the waiting room, you got to be around everybody else who's coughing and sneezing, and
Yes.
then you have to go physically see the doctor, and you got to wait for another half hour before they actually get into the waiting room. I don't understand what takes them so long, frankly, on all of that. But what if you could just make an appointment with your doctor digitally and have your consultation via something like FaceTime? Wouldn't that be better?
Yes. And it is better. It's so much better. And not only that, but like sensors and tracking are making it so much easier to give your doctors the data that they need to help make decisions. So like, I wear an Oura ring, Oura, and it tracks nonstop, like your heart rate, your movement, your tracks your sleep at night in a lot of very detailed ways. It tracks your body temperature. So I can see in my Oura if I have a temperature or not over time. Really interesting information that you could pass on to your doctor. And then there's a lot of things like scales, blood pressure monitors, blood glucose monitors that upload their data, into various apps. So having an appointment with your doctor where you actually give them actual data to make decisions with is becoming easier and easier. Why wouldn't you? Why would you waste all that time and put yourself again at risk of getting ill, either the doctor or you from other patients,
I mean, that's a
when
great
you could
point.
just
I think
jump
about
on your phone?
Yeah, I think about, when I go to the doctor's office, what do they do? Well, they might run my blood pressure, take my temperature, and then ask me questions. And then typically my visit with my doctor is just, they ask me questions, I ask them questions, we have a verbal communication, and then that's it. That can all take place over an app and over, like you said, like the Oura ring. You can get them your vitals and such that way. You don't have to go to an office to do that stuff.
Well, and the truth, like, so here's the thing with medical data, right? If your only medical data points occur once or twice a year when you go into a doctor, you don't have anything remotely like a clear picture of your average health. But if you're using things at home to track it, a scale that you use every day, a blood pressure cuff that you use every day, a ring that tracks your data, and it tracks it all over time, now you have a real picture of what normal looks like for you, as opposed to these little spot checks. So you actually have good data that is much more useful for a doctor to make a decision as opposed to this snapshot. There's a thing called white coat hypertension. It means that basically being in a medical facility or with a doctor stresses you out. And so your blood pressure reads higher than it normally is. So, like, I have this, like, whenever I go into the doctor, my blood pressure reading at the doctor, always higher. But I have my own cuff at home and I measure regularly. And at home, totally fine, right? I'm not stressed when I wake up in the morning and take a reading. And so, like, getting good data may actually be easier to do for doctors without ever having you come in.
Well, I think that I hope this prediction comes true because I think this would be a very good thing for the health system overall, not just for individuals, but for our system as a society.
Agreed. So the next one, and this one may be contentious, but I think a lot of colleges are going to end up either closing or having to drastically reduce their tuition. At the same time, I think doing more MOOCs, the massive online courses, is going to be more common, right? Because I don't think anybody could argue that the price to value ratio of college has changed a lot over the last decade or two, and not for the better.
So I went to the University of Washington and I attended, certain classes that had 3, 4, 500 students that were, all in the room at the same time. So I can envision how massive classrooms like that, where you've got all those students, inevitably many of which are sick, but they're showing up to class because there is no stay from home option when you're in college and you're paying tuition whether you're going to class or not, and you've got a test the next day that you need to get the notes for. So I can see that drastically being altered to maybe more online classes. And consequently, if you go online, I think you have to reduce your tuition. I don't think people are
Totally.
going to be cool with paying the same amount of tuition if they get what is perceived to be a lower value product. And I think that that education being delivered digitally is probably going to be perceived by people as less value than maybe an in-person instruction, right?
Yeah, I actually think a bigger shift is in the way. So, have you heard of Lambda School?
No.
Okay, so Lambda School is a startup growing rapidly, doing something interesting, and essentially they're changing the incentives. So, at present, a university has almost no incentive to make sure that you end up in a good job in your chosen field after you graduate, right? They already got their money. You pay up front. It's all on you whether you go out and get a good job or not. And there's a good amount of luck in there. Lambda School flips it. So Lambda School, you pay nothing up front. You enroll, you go through their course. Right now they focus on like programming and design. But after the end of the course, and it's 9 months, and it's a pretty extensive course. I mean, we're talking 1,000+ hours of training. By the end of it, they carefully help you to find a job at a place in your chosen field. They've given you a very solid technical foundation, and they only get paid if you get a job making more. I want to say it's more than $50,000 a year. You pay back a percentage of your income over the next 2 years, up to a maximum, and that's it. So if you're making less than 50 grand a year, you can't find a job in your field for whatever reason. That means they've failed in teaching you and helping you to get that job, and you don't pay. And if you go more than, I don't know, it's like 3 or 5 years, somewhere in there, without having been able to find a job that fits the bill and pays them back, you pay nothing. So the incentive is completely different. And I think this is an area where there's a lot of room for improvement. But that sort of trade school type approach where you only pay if the value is there, that also has the ability to upset the way that colleges traditionally work. And I think this, the coronavirus and people not being able to gather together at colleges, again, this is another thing that might accelerate a shift to a different way of doing things.
That's really interesting. It's like taking a pay for performance model and applying it to education, which I haven't heard of before.
Yeah. I think it's genius, and
Yeah.
it has some detractors. Like, it's not perfect yet. It's still a fairly not a new idea, but new as applied in this way. But it makes sense, if the quality of your education is good and you are effectively teaching people how to do something that they can go out and make money from, well, then you bloody well better be able to back that up with people who are getting jobs in those fields and who are being well rated as, yeah, I actually hired somebody who did this and their skill was fantastic, and this is great. But if a lot of people are going through your education process and they're coming out the other end and they're struggling to find jobs and they're ending up as bartenders with their fancy college degree, like, that's not a really good look.
Yeah, well, it makes a lot of sense to align incentives like that. I like it. I'll be interested to see how that goes and if that model gets applied to other colleges or, education
Same.
type
Yep.
opportunities. Well, that's an interesting one. For number 12, I'm going to go with the further acceleration of esports. I think esports are already on the rise, but I think this is going to just put the pedal to the metal for esports. So, yeah, if you're not sure, esports are essentially video games that are played competitively and they can be streamed. Even live events are held quite often for games like League of Legends or Apex Legends is one that Sam is actually really good at Apex Legends.
Love Apex.
Yeah,
So good.
I dabble with you in Apex, but I can't hold a candle to your skills.
Steep learning curve. I put too many hours into it.
I did mention in a previous episode that I do play a game called Command and Conquer Rivals, which is a mobile strategy player versus player game. But I digress. All I'm trying to say is that esports are fun. They are fascinating to watch. They're for many in many cases they can be more fun or entertaining, especially depending on your audience, than actual sports. And they are full of adrenaline, full of suspense. They have real announcers and commentators, and they are legit. I think that because they don't require any sort of physical attendance. The players can be they can compete over the internet. Ideally, the events take place in person because they don't want to have any internet connection issues or so on. But they can be done and streamed completely remote. And we're seeing a lot of that already as a result of this crisis. And I think we're seeing this kind of goes hand in hand with like the rise of streamers, right? That we talked about earlier. People are seeing that this is a legit form of entertainment and that this can be monetized. And not only can you make money through your Twitch stream, you can make money as a professional gamer, and many people are doing it. So I think,
Really good money.
yeah,
Tens of millions of dollars. Like
if you
it's
win a tournament,
definitely
yeah, and many of these players will attend tournaments every week or several a month, and depending on where they place in the tournament, they'll win prize money. And if you're good enough, you can win enough prize money to pay all your bills and make a business out of it. And that's what many people are doing. And what we're seeing is that as this becomes more and more popular and as the competition gets more fierce, the product, the content, the games themselves are becoming more and more intense, more fun, more entertaining, and that's attracting and drawing audiences. And those audiences are attracting advertisers, and that is why esports is getting big.
totally. Last one, I would say, number 13, I think travel habits are going to change dramatically and for a lot of reasons. I think, for one, borders are probably going to be, if not closed, at least more restricted for a while going forward, especially in some countries. Depending on how quickly this goes away, it could dramatically affect a lot of things. So, the availability of places to rent, the cost, which airlines are and aren't running, which airlines are and aren't bankrupt. I think there may be I don't know if it'll be a permanent change in travel habits, but I think for a while, travel habits are going to be a bit different and options are going to be a bit more restricted because of this. I'm seeing this myself, right? As a digital nomad, like at the moment I'm stuck in Croatia. My options on where to go are pretty limited. Land borders are still closed and I don't know exactly when or how that'll change.
Yeah, I was going to say you've got a pretty unique perspective on this. You've been in what, like 20 different countries over the last couple of years, something like that. you
13, 14, yeah, a lot.
and so you're seeing firsthand how this is affecting things. And I myself, I love to travel more I love to travel with my wife occasionally just to do vacations and so on. And yeah, I'm interested to see what changes are going to come into play because of this. You look at like 9/11, right, and how that changed travel, how it changed airports. You never used to have to take your shoes off to go through security.
Yeah.
Well, now you do. And they had the body scanners that they put up. If you know what, those didn't used to exist either. It used to just be the X-ray. So a lot of changes happened after 9/11, and I can see this crisis creating a similar new set of changes that are designed to probably enforce various social distancing rules and essentially just prevent this sort of thing from happening again because it is so damaging to really the whole world, the world's economy, and nobody wants this to happen again. So, I mean, do you have any specific ideas on what they might do, Sam, to change travel that will sort of in response to this?
I don't. I mean, it's quite the mess. You look around and everybody's handling it a little bit differently. Some places, China, like checking temperatures multiple places, giving you passes, swabbing your cheek, and making sure you don't have COVID. Like some places are going to pretty severe extremes in how they're screening people entering their country. Some borders are just outright shut. I don't know. This is hugely up in the air. I'm hearing some people think that we may see a decrease in globalization, a return to more nationalism, closed borders, less travel. Like, I don't know. I think it's now seen as a vector of risk, and some countries may just choose to eat the hit to their GDP from travel to keep their population safe, because the cost of having people come in from places where they're likely to be sick is just too high.
Yeah, I think there's also going to be companies that, not companies, countries that rely so much on tourism that they're that's not going to be an option to them. So they're going to be
Yeah.
forced to have other. They're not going to be able to just close or shut down or even limit travel because they rely so much on it. So they're going to have to make some changes to try to just prevent the spread of disease. One interesting thing. So my parents, they're retired and they live in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico, about half the year. They're kind of snowbirds, and they're down there right now. They should have been back here in the United States a month ago, but because of the crisis, they've decided to stay and sort of hunker down there. Well, they live in a condo complex down there, and they told me that every not only is every employee, guard, and staff wearing masks right now down there, but anybody who enters the property has to go through a security check, and they're using a hand scanner that uses like a laser infrared scanner. They said that's pretty cool, and it tells them your temperature, and if it's above.
Crazy.
And this includes anybody, even if it's residents who just walked out and came back in. If it's a taxi driver that's bringing a resident in from the market, an Uber driver, everybody has to go through this scan. And this might
That's not
be
terribly I mean, that's not terribly effective. It's effective if you're ill, but obviously you're able to spread this long before you're ill. So having a temperature isn't, I
right.
mean, it's certainly not an early warning indicator. It's probably not terribly useful
I think
uh,
it's
in most
I
scenarios.
think it's more of a sign of giving people some sort of sense that they're
Yes.
doing whatever they can do, even if it's not much, it's something. But
Yeah.
it might be a glimpse of what is to come. Maybe they'll have a better way
Yes.
of detecting somebody who is symptomatic, maybe using AI, like behavior habits, and putting up a flag
I've
or a
heard,
warning that this person might
I
be
mean,
infected.
I heard somebody's working on an app using AI to listen to your cough and try and tell if you have COVID. A company is working on a saliva test that can instantaneously or close to instantaneously determine if there's any trace of COVID in the saliva. Like there's a lot of people working really hard at solving this really fast. So I think, not only do I think we're going to kick this sooner probably rather than later, but I think we're going to come up with some really interesting things we can apply in other scenarios afterwards. But in terms of just travel habits, I think it's very much up in the air, but some things will definitely change.
Well, I'm really interested to see what happens, and I think we'll have to revisit these predictions, once this crisis is over, and see how we did. Huh?
Agreed.
Take a count. Well, I think that covers it. That's our 13 predictions. Thank you for tuning in, for listening. Hopefully, you found our discussion interesting. I think we were really excited to talk about this stuff. If you've got any predictions that you have that you want us to know about, hit us up. You can shoot us an email. You can find us on Twitter. Just go ahead and find us on Twitter for now, or add us on LinkedIn, and we'll get you an email address later on that you can use.
Yes. Thank you so much for listening. This has been a bit of a longer episode than we're normally doing. We usually try and keep it around 20-ish minutes. This is pushing closer to an hour. Let us know if you like that or don't like that. If you like longer episodes where we go deeper on some stuff, or if you prefer the shorter, punchier ones.
Yeah.
So if you like, you can let us know in whether on Twitter, you can leave a review, leave a rating, tell us however you're most comfortable. But thank you so much for listening.
Thanks. We'll see you next time.